Coolio crossed every cultural line they told him he couldn't. One artist, one sound, and suddenly the whole world was listening. Bob Marley turned personal pain into something that outlived him by half a century. That kind of reach doesn't happen by accident. Anne Heche took risks on screen that most actors quietly admired and never dared to match. Tony Bennett recorded his final album at 95. He simply refused to stop, and the music kept proving him right. Suzanne Summers built an entire second act on her own terms after Hollywood tried to write her out. She redefined what a long career could look like. David Crosby made enemies, made masterpieces, and kept showing up. Some artists just will not be finished. There is a moment in every Clint Eastwood film where the world goes quiet. The music drops, the frame tightens, and you feel instinctively that whatever comes next will matter. That tension, earned, not manufactured, is the defining signature of a career that has now stretched across 8 decades of American life. To understand how it got there, you have to understand the people who shaped it, challenged it, and sometimes tried to end it. He was born Clinton Eastwood Jr. on May 31st, 1930, in San Francisco, into a family that moved constantly. His father, Clinton Sr., was a manufacturing executive who chased work through the Depression, dragging the family from city to city, Piedmont, Sacramento, Pacific Grove. His mother, Ruth, kept the household grounded. Clint would later say that the instability of those years taught him one thing clearly: you figure it out yourself, or you don't figure it out at all. There was warmth in his family, but not much in the way of mapped-out futures. He was a big, quiet kid who liked jazz, cars, and being left alone. The jazz mattered. It still matters. His mother introduced him to music early, and by his teenage years, he was playing piano seriously enough to consider it a path. That love of structure inside improvisation, of knowing the rules well enough to break them at exactly the right moment, would become the hidden architecture of everything he did later, on screen and behind the camera. After a stint in the Army during the Korean War era, stationed at Fort Ord in California, Eastwood landed in Hollywood through a side door. He was screen-tested at Universal in 1954, given a small contract, and handed forgettable roles in forgettable pictures. His early mentor of sorts was the director Arthur Lubin, who cast him in a few minor films and encouraged him to stay patient. But patience in the Universal machine of the 1950s looked a lot like invisibility, and Eastwood's contract was eventually dropped. A lesser man might have read that as a verdict. Instead, he landed in television. Rawhide debuted in 1959, and for 6 seasons, Eastwood played Rowdy Yates, a cattle drive ramrod in a weekly Western series. His co-star and the show's anchor was Eric Fleming, who played trail boss Gil Favor, the older, steadier presence to Eastwood's restless young hand. Fleming got top billing, Fleming got the gravitas, and Eastwood got something arguably more valuable: time. 6 years of television work, 6 years of learning how cameras moved, how sets were lit, how scenes were cut together. He watched everything. He absorbed it. When people later marveled at how naturally he transitioned to directing, the answer was hiding in plain sight. He had essentially been in film school for half a decade, and nobody had charged him tuition. But it was a filmmaker 5,000 miles away who changed the trajectory of his life entirely. Sergio Leone was building something new in the Spanish desert, a brutal, operatic, morally stripped-down version of the Western, and he needed an American face. He had seen Eastwood on Rawhide and made the call. Leone's instinct was that Eastwood's stillness, the quality that American television had never quite figured out how to use, was actually dynamite on a widescreen. He was right. A Fistful of Dollars, released in Italy in 1964, invented The Man with No Name. For a few dollars more, and the good, the bad, and the ugly followed. The trilogy made Eastwood an international star before Hollywood had gotten around to deciding he was worth one. Leone himself was an overwhelming creative force, operatic, maximalist, obsessive about every frame. Working with him was not comfortable. Leone loved long silences, but he controlled them. Eastwood, by temperament and by the jazz logic in his bones, wanted to find silence on his own terms. The creative friction between them was real, and it was productive. Leone taught Eastwood that cinema could be an almost physical experience, that a close-up could carry the weight of a monologue, that music could do things dialogue couldn't. Eastwood never forgot it. He would spend the next 50 years proving it. Back in America, Don Siegel became the next crucial figure. Where Leone was baroque, Siegel was ruthlessly efficient, a director's director who believed in clarity, economy, and letting actors breathe. He and Eastwood made 5 films together, beginning with Coogan's Bluff in 1968 and culminating in The Shootist in 1976. Their most famous collaboration was Dirty Harry in 1971, which generated enormous controversy and enormous box office, and cemented Eastwood as the defining screen icon of a certain kind of American disillusionment. Inspector Harry Callahan was not a comfortable hero. He was abrasive, insubordinate, contemptuous of bureaucracy, and utterly sure of his own moral compass, even when that compass pointed somewhere the culture found troubling. Siegel trusted Eastwood in a way that the studio system hadn't. He listened when Eastwood pushed back. He let him develop instincts about pacing, about cutting, about when a scene had said enough. Eastwood has credited Siegel more than almost anyone else as the filmmaker who taught him what directing actually felt like from the inside. When he finally stepped behind the camera himself, it was Siegel's economy he reached for first. His directorial debut, Play Misty for Me, in 1971, came the same year as Dirty Harry, a remarkable double and a deliberate act of self-definition. He cast himself as a jazz DJ targeted by a dangerous obsession and made a lean, genuinely unsettling thriller that critics largely underestimated at the time. But it proved he could control a set. It proved he had a visual instinct, and it laid the groundwork for the body of directorial work that would eventually reframe his entire legacy. Throughout the 1970s and early 1980s, Eastwood was partnered professionally and romantically with Sondra Locke, who appeared in 6 films with him across that period, including The Outlaw Josie Wales and Sudden Impact. Their relationship was one of the defining personal entanglements of his life, and its end was acrimonious in ways that played out publicly, including a lawsuit Locke brought alleging he had torpedoed her directing career at Warner Brothers. It was a chapter that did not reflect well on him. He has rarely addressed it in depth, but it is part of the record, and the record matters. The professional relationship that stabilized and extended his career most durably was with Warner Brothers itself, specifically with the studio infrastructure that gave him almost unparalleled autonomy through Malpaso Productions, the company he formed early in his career and kept tight and lean. Malpaso let him move fast, small crews, minimal takes, no wasted days. Directors who worked with him later as actors were often startled by how little fat there was in his process. He came prepared. He expected everyone else to be prepared. He shot what he needed and moved on. That discipline produced a body of directorial work of startling range. Bronco Billy in 1980 was warm and eccentric, and almost nobody saw it. Bird in 1988, his biography of Charlie Parker, was a labor of love, rooted in that lifelong jazz obsession, and earned him a Golden Globe. White Hunter Black Heart, also from 1990, was a strange, brave film about obsession and moral failure, loosely based on John Huston, that confused audiences and interested serious critics. These were not the films of a man coasting on his star power. They were the films of someone genuinely curious about what cinema could hold. And then came Unforgiven. Released in 1992, it was a film Eastwood had been sitting on for years, a script by David Webb Peoples that he knew was special, and waited until he felt old enough to play it correctly. Will Money, the retired killer who picks up the gun one last time, is not a heroic figure. He is haunted, diminished, dangerous in the way that old violence is always dangerous, not because it has gone away, but because it has gone quiet. Unforgiven won 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. It announced Eastwood not as a movie star who could direct, but as a filmmaker of genuine moral seriousness. His collaborator in that next chapter was increasingly Morgan Freeman, an actor whose gravity and intelligence complemented Eastwood's stripped-down style in ways that produced some of the most emotionally forceful work of either man's career. They made Million Dollar Baby together in 2004, which Eastwood directed from a script by Paul Haggis. The film won 4 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director again, making Eastwood one of the rare filmmakers to win the award twice. At 74, he was not slowing down. He was deepening. Mystic River in 2003, Letters from Iwo Jima and Flags of Our Fathers in 2006, Gran Torino in 2008, Invictus in 2009, American Sniper in 2014. The list of films from his 7th and 8th decades is longer and more varied than the entire output of many celebrated directors half his age. American Sniper, in particular, became a cultural flashpoint, generating polarized political readings that somewhat obscured its actual craft. It was the highest-grossing film of his career. He was 84 years old. The political dimension of Eastwood's public life has always been complicated. He served as mayor of Carmel by the Sea in 1986 and 1987, a stint he took seriously and largely recalls with amusement. His speech at the 2012 Republican National Convention, the famous empty chair improvisation directed at an imaginary Barack Obama, became an instant cultural meme and drew as much mockery as admiration. It was eccentric and unscripted in ways that seemed to baffle even his supporters, but it was also, in its own way, very Clint Eastwood. He showed up, he did it his way, and he didn't particularly care how it landed. His personal life has been genuinely complex. Multiple marriages and relationships, 7 acknowledged children, including actors Scott Eastwood and Francesca Eastwood. A long partnership with television journalist Dina Ruiz that ended in divorce. He has not always been a model of private virtue, but he has also never tried to sell himself as one. The screen persona, solitary, self-reliant, unbeholden to anyone's opinion, has always been part autobiography. His son, Scott, has followed him into acting, and Clint has been characteristically unsentimental about it. Support without interference, opportunity without favoritism. The relationship says something about who he is as a father, which is probably not entirely unlike who he is as a director. Present, demanding, but ultimately letting the other person find their own way. The audiences who have stayed with him across the decades form a relationship of their own. They are not monolithic. The people who loved Dirty Harry in 1971 are not the same people who wept at $1 Million Baby in 2004, and yet somehow they overlap. He has always managed to hold multiple Americas at once, the America that wants justice served cold, and the America that understands how much justice costs. That dual fluency is rare. It is probably why his films keep finding new viewers who are certain he was speaking directly to them. He directed Richard Jewell in 2019, a film about the security guard wrongly suspected of the 1996 Atlanta Olympic bombing. A story about institutional power, media carelessness, and the ordinary man ground up by both. It was well reviewed and widely seen as a return to form after some thinner years. Cry Macho followed in 2021, with Eastwood at 91, both directing and starring. A road trip story, lean and autumnal, about an old horseman escorting a boy back to his father. It was not his greatest film. It may be the most autobiographical thing he has ever made. A man at the end of a long road, still moving, still useful, still finding something worth doing. He continues to work, he continues to produce. At 94, Clint Eastwood is not a museum piece or a monument. He is a filmmaker in the middle of a career that has lasted longer than most careers have the right to last. Sustained by discipline, curiosity, and almost geological stubbornness, and the deep conviction learned from his mother's piano and Sergio Leone's desert and Don Siegel's uncluttered frames, that if you have something worth saying, you say it as clearly and as honestly as you can, and then you let it go. The world goes quiet, the frame tightens, and whatever comes next still matters.